Listen, the footage that's been circulating from Brown's practice, it's got people talking. And when I say talking, I mean the entire conversation around Shedeur Sanders and what's happening in Cleveland just shifted. Because what we're seeing on that field, in the snow, slinging that football around like it's nothing, it doesn't match up with how this whole situation has been handled. And now Kevin Stefanski is out here answering questions about his job security, while Shedeur is getting ready for what might be his last start of the season. Something about all this just feels off. Let me walk y'all through it. So here's where we're at. Shedeur Sanders is preparing for his 7th start this season, his final matchup. Cincinnati Bengals, division game. And the practice footage that's out there, he's moving, he's throwing. It's snowy, it's cold, and this man is out there working like he's been doing this his whole life at this level. Which, in fairness, he kind of has been preparing for this his whole life. But here's the thing that's got everybody in their feelings right now. We got reporters asking Kevin Stefanski about his job security. We got Stefanski giving these very measured, very coach-speak answers about Shedeur's development. And meanwhile, the internet is going crazy because the context of how he got here, it's messy. Real messy. Let's rewind. Let's talk about how Shedeur Sanders even ended up in Cleveland in the first place, because that's where this whole story starts to get uncomfortable. Draft night, Colorado star quarterback, Heisman conversation, national spotlight, primetime sun, all the pressure, all the expectations, all the narratives. Cleveland takes him, and immediately the debate starts. Is he ready? Is he the guy? What's the plan? Now, from what we've seen publicly, from the reports that came out during the offseason, from the way camp was structured, it didn't look like Shedeur was being set up as the immediate starter. And listen, that's not automatically a problem. Plenty of young quarterbacks sit. Plenty of organizations want to develop guys slowly. That's a legitimate philosophy. But here's where it gets weird. Based on everything that's been discussed in the media, everything fans have pointed out, everything we've observed from the outside, it doesn't seem like there was ever a real, legitimate quarterback competition. And I'm not talking about what was said in press conferences. I'm talking about what actually happened on that practice field. From what's been reported, from what people who follow this team closely have said, Shedeur wasn't getting first-team reps. Wasn't really getting second-team reps. There's talk that he was barely getting third-team reps. Stories floating around that he was on the opposite side of the field, throwing to equipment managers, just staying ready however he could. And look, I'm not saying I was there. I'm not claiming I have inside access to every practice. But when multiple reports say the same thing, when the pattern is that consistent, when fans are noticing it, media members are commenting on it, and even now looking back at how it all played out, you start to ask questions. This isn't me making accusations. This is me saying what a lot of people are already thinking. Why draft a quarterback that high if you're not even going to give him a fair shot to compete? There's even been talk, and again, this is based on what's circulating out there, that Shedeur had to go practice at local high schools just to get actual reps, just to stay sharp, just to make sure his timing didn't fall apart while he was sitting on the sideline, watching other quarterbacks get the opportunities. Think about that for a second. A first-round quarterback, a guy who just dominated at the college level, a guy who the organization chose to invest in, and he's out there finding high school fields to get work in because the team isn't giving him the reps he needs. That's not normal. That's not how young quarterbacks are typically developed. And it raises questions. Now we saw other quarterbacks start ahead of Shedeur. We saw how those games went. We saw the offense struggle. We saw the turnovers. We saw the lack of production. And through all of that, Shedeur is waiting, preparing, staying ready, even though the opportunities aren't coming. And here's what makes this whole thing even more complicated. When you look at the roster, when you look at the offensive line situation, when you look at the weapons available, when you look at the scheme, this isn't exactly an ideal situation for any quarterback, let alone a rookie. But two things can be true at once. The situation can be difficult, and the way Shedeur was handled can be questionable. Those aren't mutually exclusive, and that's what a lot of people seem to miss when they're trying to defend the organization or defend the coaching staff. This isn't about making excuses for anybody. This is about context. This is about looking at the full picture and acknowledging that what we've witnessed doesn't quite add up. So eventually, Shedeur gets his shot, he gets his opportunity to start, and what have we seen? We've seen moments of really impressive play, we've seen composure under pressure, we've seen him make throws that show why he was drafted. But we've also seen the struggles that come with being a young quarterback on a team that's not built to support a young quarterback. The offensive line has had issues. The run game hasn't been consistent. The play calling has been criticized. The weapons, while talented, haven't always been healthy or in sync. These are all factors. These all matter. And yet, when things don't go perfectly, when the wins aren't coming, the conversation immediately shifts to whether Shedeur is the answer, whether he's good enough, whether the team made a mistake. But here's what's not being talked about enough. Where was this energy during the offseason? Where was this urgency to figure out if Shedeur was the guy when they could have been giving him the reps, the practice time, the real competition to prove it? You can't not give a guy a fair opportunity to develop and compete, and then turn around and judge him harshly when he finally does get thrown into a less than ideal situation. That's not fair to the player, and fans are starting to see that. Now we got this practice footage going viral, and I want y'all to really think about what we're seeing here. It's snowy, it's cold, it's late in the season, the team is out of playoff contention. Stefanski's job might be on the line. There's every reason for a young quarterback to just go through the motions at this point. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing Shedeur out there working, moving around, making throws, staying engaged, staying locked in. Even though this might be his last start of the season, even though the record isn't where anybody wants it to be, even though there's uncertainty about what next season looks like, that shows something about his character, about his work ethic, about his approach to the game. And people are noticing. The reporters at that press conference, they're noticing too. You can hear it in the questions they're asking Stefanski. One reporter straight up said they think Stefanski had to deal with things that were unfair this year. That he had to coach an offense that was inferior to the teams they were facing. That's a reporter, someone who covers this team regularly, openly acknowledging that the situation wasn't set up for success. And Stefanski's response? Very diplomatic, very measured. Talking about how the game is never about one person. Talking about putting players in position to win. Talking about areas of improvement. All standard coach speak. All things you'd expect him to say. But what he's not saying is just as interesting as what he is saying. He's not saying Shedeur wasn't ready. He's not saying the decision to not give him a real competition was the right call. He's not defending the way the quarterback situation was handled in the offseason. He's just moving forward, focusing on the present, staying professional. And look, that's probably the smart thing to do in his position. But it doesn't answer the questions that fans have. It doesn't address the uncomfortable reality that a lot of people are starting to see. When they asked Stefanski about Shedeur heading into this final game, about what he wants to see, Stefanski talked about building on the good things, about areas of improvement, about putting the team in position to win. Generic stuff, safe stuff. The kind of answer that doesn't tell us anything we don't already know. But here's what's interesting. Despite everything, despite the way this whole situation has unfolded, despite the lack of support and development early on, Shedeur is still out there competing, still showing flashes, still demonstrating why he was considered one of the top quarterback prospects in his class. And that's what makes this whole thing so frustrating for people who have been following along. Because you're watching a young player with clear talent, clear potential, clear work ethic, and the question isn't, is he good enough? The question is, what could he be if the situation was different? That reporter who mentioned David Njoku saying Stefanski didn't like him at first? That whole exchange was revealing. Because it showed that Stefanski's coaching style, his approach to players, especially young players, isn't always immediately warm or encouraging. It takes time for guys to understand him, to get comfortable with him, to build that relationship. And that's fine. Every coach is different. Every coach has their own style. But when you're dealing with a rookie quarterback who's already facing enormous pressure and scrutiny, who's already dealing with being a first-round pick and all the expectations that come with it, who's already navigating being the son of an NFL legend and Hall of Famer, maybe that's not the ideal coaching match. Maybe that communication style, that approach, that distance, maybe it's part of why things haven't clicked the way they could have. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened. I'm saying it's worth considering. It's worth thinking about. Because the gap between what we see in that practice footage, the talent and ability on display, and what we've seen in actual game results, something isn't translating. Something isn't connecting. And it's not all on the player. The other reporter asked about the team having something special despite the record. And Stefanski talked about staying in the moment. Not looking in the rear view, not looking too far ahead, just focusing on what's in front of them. Again, standard coach speak. But what does that actually mean for Shedeur? What does that mean for his development? What does that mean for next season? Because if Stefanski is coaching for his job, if there's a real possibility he's not back next year, then Shedeur could be on his second head coach, second system, second offense, second everything before he's even had a real chance to establish himself. That's not a recipe for success. That's not how you develop a franchise quarterback. And Browns fans know this better than anybody because they've lived through this cycle over and over and over again. New quarterback, new coaching staff, new system, high hopes. Things don't work immediately. Patience runs out. Blow it up. Start over. Repeat. And the whole time you never really know what you had because you never gave it enough time, enough consistency, enough support to actually find out. That's the trap Cleveland keeps falling into. And watching it happen again, watching it potentially happen with Shedeur, it's frustrating for people who just want to see this organization finally get it right. Now let's talk about what happens in this Cincinnati game. Division opponent. Team that already beat them earlier in the season. Stefanski mentioned they remember that Week 1 game. They want to even the series. They want to compete. But realistically, what are the stakes here? For the team, for Shedeur specifically, what is this game actually about? It's not a playoff game. The season is essentially over in terms of postseason hopes. So this becomes about evaluation, about development, about seeing what you have going forward. And that puts Shedeur in an interesting position. Because on one hand, he wants to go out there and play well. He wants to show what he can do. He wants to prove he deserves to be the guy moving forward. That's natural. That's competitive. That's the mindset you want from your quarterback. But on the other hand, he's doing it in a situation where the supporting cast might not be at full strength, where the game plan might be conservative, where the offensive line might be struggling, where all the factors that have made it difficult all season are still present. So if he doesn't have a perfect game, if there are mistakes, if things don't go smoothly, does that get held against him? Does that become ammunition for people who want to say he's not the answer? That's the impossible situation young quarterbacks often find themselves in. Judged on results, without enough consideration for circumstances. Expected to overcome everything around them while still learning the position at the highest level. And Shedeur has handled it with a level of maturity and professionalism that honestly deserves more credit than it gets. Because think about everything he's had to deal with. The lack of reps in camp, the questions about whether he earned his opportunity, the comparisons to other quarterbacks, the pressure of being a Sanders, the criticism that comes with being a high-profile player. Most young quarterbacks would crumble under that. Most would let the frustration show. Most would lose confidence or start pointing fingers. But from everything we've seen, from the way he carries himself, from the way he prepares, from the way he shows up every week ready to compete, he's handled it the right way. And that matters. That tells you something about who he is as a player and as a person. The viral practice footage, the way people are reacting to it, it's because fans are starting to see what they could have if everything else was in place. They're seeing the talent, they're seeing the potential, they're seeing a quarterback who could be really good in this league if given the right situation. And that's what makes the current circumstances so frustrating, because it feels like an opportunity being wasted. It feels like a player being set up to struggle rather than set up to succeed. Now, I'm not saying Shedeur is perfect. I'm not saying he doesn't have things to work on. Every young quarterback does. He's made mistakes this season. There have been throws he'd like to have back. Decisions that didn't work out. Moments where the inexperience showed. That's normal. That's expected. That's part of the development process. But the question is, are those growing pains happening in an environment that's conducive to growth? Is he getting the coaching, the support, the consistency, the patience that young quarterbacks need to develop? Or is he being thrown into a difficult situation and expected to figure it out on his own? Based on how this whole season has unfolded, based on how the off-season was handled, based on the reports and the footage and the way things have played out, it seems more like the latter. And that's a problem. That's organizational failure, not player failure. Kevin Stefanski's job being in jeopardy, that's a whole separate conversation. But it's connected to all of this. Because if the head coach is on the hot seat, if there's uncertainty about his future, that affects everything. That affects how players are developed, how decisions are made, how the team approaches the rest of the season. You can't build stability when everyone's worried about job security. You can't focus on long-term development when everything is short-term survival mode. And that instability, that uncertainty, it's been hanging over this organization for a while now. It's not new, it's not surprising. But it is exhausting for fans who just want to see consistent, competent football. The fact that a reporter felt compelled to tell Stefanski directly that they think he's had to deal with unfair circumstances this year, that speaks to the broader dysfunction. Because that shouldn't need to be said. That shouldn't be the narrative around a head coach in his 4th or 5th season with a team. Either the organization is setting people up to succeed, or they're not. And increasingly, it seems like they're not. Shedeur getting ready for this final game. Working in the snow, staying locked in, staying professional. That's him doing his part. That's him controlling what he can control. That's him showing the kind of player he is, regardless of the circumstances around him. And people are responding to that. People are seeing that. The footage going viral isn't just because he throws a nice ball. It's because the contrast between his approach and the dysfunction around him is so stark. It's because fans are tired of seeing talented players get wasted by organizational incompetence. It's because there's frustration with how this has all been handled from the beginning. It's because at some point, you have to start asking the uncomfortable questions. You have to start examining the patterns. You have to start holding the organization accountable for the decisions they make and the situations they create. And right now, those questions are getting louder. The criticism is getting sharper. The patience is running out. Whether that results in actual change, whether Stefanski is back next year, whether Shedeur gets a real opportunity to be the franchise quarterback in a stable situation, we don't know yet. What we do know is that the current approach isn't working. The current situation isn't sustainable, and something has to give. Shedeur has shown enough that he deserves a fair chance, not a perfect situation, because those don't exist in the NFL. But a fair chance, a real opportunity to develop with consistent coaching, a legitimate supporting cast, and the patience that young quarterbacks need, whether Cleveland is willing or able to provide that, whether they even recognize that's what's needed. That's the question that's going to define the next phase of this franchise. And watching that practice footage, seeing Shedeur out there working, seeing him stay committed despite everything, you can't help but wonder what could be if the organization matched his level of commitment and professionalism. That's what has people talking. That's what has this footage going viral. That's what has the conversation shifting. Because talent is obvious. Potential is clear. The question was never whether Shedeur Sanders could play quarterback in the NFL. The question is whether Cleveland is going to give him the opportunity to prove it. And right now, as we head into this final game of the season, as Stefanski's job security is being openly questioned, as the uncertainty about next year hangs over everything, that question still doesn't have an answer. What we're left with is a talented young quarterback who's done everything asked of him, working in the snow, preparing for a game that might not matter in the standings but matters a whole lot for his future. We're left with a coaching staff that might not be back next year, trying to finish the season with some dignity while the pressure mounts. We're left with an organization that continues to struggle with the basics of building a functional, competitive football team. And we're left with fans who are tired of the cycle, tired of the dysfunction, tired of watching talent get wasted. The footage is viral because it represents hope, because it shows what could be, because even in the snow, even in a lost season, even with everything working against him, Shedeur Sanders is still out there competing, still working, still preparing, still believing. The question is whether that's enough, whether belief and talent and work ethic can overcome organizational failure, whether one player can rise above the circumstances and force everyone else to recognize what they have. History says probably not. History says the situation matters more than individual talent. History says that without the right support system, even the best players struggle to reach their potential. But hope says, maybe this time is different. Maybe Shedeur is different. Maybe something about this situation, as messy as it is, forces the changes that need to happen. Maybe the viral footage, the media attention, the growing frustration from fans and reporters alike, maybe it all adds up to something. Or maybe we're just watching the same old story play out again. Same cycle, same mistakes, same disappointing results. That's what makes this moment so uncomfortable. Because we've seen this before. We know how it usually ends. But we keep hoping for something different. And Shedeur keeps working, keeps preparing, keeps showing up. Whether that's enough to change the trajectory of this franchise, whether the organization is capable of building around him the way they need to,